Firstly, I would like to recommend some data types that we suggest to use. When you have to store geographical points, for example, we suggest that you use geography instead of geolocation. Geolocation is a GeneXus data type. It's a string. We know how to use it, but geography belongs to databases. Here we have a syntaxis just by way of example to assign a geography attribute. We are assigning the kind of data dot one of the methods applicable, and in this case I need front string because it needs to receive this string with this syntactics point, then longitude and etc. And it's suggested to make things easier for you, and also you will have PDFs to take away with you. We are also suggesting to use these types of data, images, video, audio, block file instead of blob, because blob is generic, it's from the past, and a priority, it doesn't have a way of showing the content because it can be on any kind. But when GeneXus sees image, for example, it knows what it's about and can use the camera, for example, or upload from an image library. And the same thing happens with these specific data types. Now, I'll talk about these data types. GUID. Maybe some of you are familiar with these data types. This means globally unique identifier, and it's a numeric that is obtained in a pseudo-random manner. It's not that the number that is obtained cannot be repeated, but the probabilities are very low because it's a very long number. It may be a MAC that takes some information and then the date at random, and all that information makes the number almost impossible to be repeated. But what if GeneXus will solve it? It executes it again? Well, actually, it's not a question of GeneXus. What I want to recommend is the kind of data that are offered by databases. So what I want is to show it to you and tell them when it is important to use it. If I use this kind or this type of data, it's much better than the self-numeric because I can have self-generation. So if GeneXus finds a repetition because of a probability, is it executed again when you create a new registry? I cannot give you an answer. I'm not sure. What does GeneXus do? Well, in fact, we are not going to do it. The world doesn't do it. Theoretically, because all this is theoretical, it's not going to happen that if you and I, who are in different countries, call this function, we will get the same number. Now that I get myself twice the same number, that won't happen. What we want to solve is the chance that you and I create the same number. There is a probability, but the problem is out there in the world. It's a cosmic ray, and sorry if it happens, that's the way of the world. It's not something that we want to solve. It's out of our scope. It's not that I want to create a UID different from the one I created. I want to create a GUID that is completely different from anything else that anyone has done, and the probability is so low that it's not of interest to GeneXus or to the world. And if it's in the DMS, I ask the DMS directly, and it creates its own UID, and we all assume that it won't be repeated. So that's the idea. So we have this universal single number.
I wanted to explain that the important thing here is to take it into account when we work in divided environments, in distributed environments. When we are working with points of sales, or when we are working with SD offline. In SD offline, if we have a transaction, customs and invoice that are typical, instead of using a number for keys and give it auto number, because at the time of synchronizing they can overlap, then you simply have to take advantage of this type of data. And if it's a key, then true would be on.
Entonces, y en el caso.
Now, in the case of applications for points of sale, just imagine that you're working in several branches unconnected with headquarters, and so we used to put composed keys, the number of terminal, correlative number, and then in the evening you would have all the data sent, and in order not to regenerate the keys, but those composed keys, well, they are really very composed, and to reference them as composed keys. And so if you have to it's better to take into account this type of data so that the key is simple and it's solved universally. Well, this is not a question, it's just a comment. It works extremely well, because this is an application that we haven't made much noise about because of a decision of the company, but it's to do some follow-up in agriculture, and the best thing was to do GUID, and it does everything it has to do, and it does it really very well. Now, another primary thing is, when you have to generate different names of files, or site keys, or tokens to change passwords, so this is a syntax, but you can go into our wiki and allocate a value to a variable. So we're using this type of data, the method, but we want to use the new GUID for a new number. Very well. Now, my next recommendation would be to move on to caching, and it takes into account the performance of applications, the response time as far as possible. And in general terms, to improve the response time, what you try and do is to bring down the cache data from the memory instead of reading it from the database. Our recommendation is that you should take into account which tables are, for instance, currency, or in the case of countries, or marital status, or gender, which are not frequently changed because they keep the same data, and have those data in cache. And you can solve this very easily with GeneXus. You turn on certain properties, and these are the properties at the level of the generator. You have the property. It says access caching, and then you identify the tables, which are not frequently changed. I did it for currency here. Change frequency with this value, hardly ever. And then The rest is to rebuild all, for instance, or rebuild those objects. This is good also. It works fine with smart devices. You simply have to change some properties at the level of the identifier. In our wiki, you can look up caching, and you will have all the descriptions very well detailed. Brief recommendation to be taken into account: try to use enumerated domains instead of strings in the code, if you can. The benefits are to try and avoid having values in different parts of the code, to have a clearer reading, and the values are in one place in the KB, and that's centralized. And to conclude, just a brief suggestion. Please use this exclamation mark. Let me explain this. Sometimes we don't think that our application is going to be translated, but let's hope it is in the future. So when we are allocating a mail or a brand, something that is not necessary to translate, but that is going to be constant. If you can write an exclamation mark at the beginning, so all the language objects are not overcharged, and we have to complete the same. Very well, that is the end of my presentation, and what I wanted to suggest. We're now going to have a short break, and then we're going to go up to the 4th floor to go into the practical class to show you the functionalities. Then we're going to have a break, and then we will see you back in this room at 2 o'clock. All right? So you're going to see something of GeneXus server and so on. So thank you very much.